Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall joins me now. He's a chaplain who is sacked from his job at Trent College. We have sort of talked about it, Reverend, but let's just go into the details of this, because you're now suing Trent College and indeed its headmaster. Just explain briefly why.
Goodness, it's such a long story. Well, I was the school chaplain. Long story short, I gave a sermon in the chapel saying that people didn't have to agree with everything that LGBT plus activists say. They make up their own minds. They may hold to traditional Christian understandings, or they can accept all the LGBT stuff, and that would be fine too. For that, I was initially sacked, later reinstated on appeal, but with a list of 20 conditions, including censorship of all sermons, not allowed to mention anywhere around the school anything that might upset or offend anyone. I was also reported to Prevent, the anti-terror scheme. I was reported to the local authority safeguarding officers and the church safeguarding officials. So I was accused of being a terrorist and a child abuser.
Right.
For giving a sermon which simply set out you may accept different viewpoints.
I mean, OK, and I accept that that's your intention with that sermon. Can you imagine if you are a child listening to it who might be gay, who might be trans, and then they might reflect, look, you know, the church isn't as inclusive as it seems. This reverend is speaking to me saying that what I believe might not hold water with others. That puts me in a really awkward position. You might have made children feel bad about themselves.
Well, except that they're in the same position as, say, a Muslim or Hindu child, of which there were those in the school, or indeed an atheist. Part of the point of a chapel is to present the Christian understanding, but part of what I also wanted to do was to say, you know, I'm Christian wholeheartedly, and that allows you to be wholeheartedly whatever your belief system is. So if we say you cannot challenge someone's beliefs in an educational context, what is the point of education?
Yes.
So, yes, of course, there's a certain sensitivity there, and I fully understand that. But the response should be not sack the chaplain who might possibly have upset someone, rather work with that upset and say, OK, on balance, is there a way to have a conversation about this? Can we deal with this in a way that gives you resilience for the future? Because if these children spend their whole lives being told, if you're upset, that's a terrible thing, they will grow into adulthood as very fragile adults. But if they are taken and told, OK, you're upset, let's explore that, but aren't Christians allowed to have their views just as you're allowed your views?
Yes.
Let's work with it. Then they develop resilience and they go through life as happy adults. And that's actually what we're aiming for.
Do you know whether anyone actually complained about the sermon? I mean, how did it suddenly... This happened in 2019, by the way. You've been helped by a group called Christian Concern.
That's right, who have been fantastic.
But did people complain? Were there a flurry of complaints? Let's just pick out one line that kind of summarises what your view was. You're entitled, if you wish, you told the children, to look at some of the claims made about gender identity and think that it is incoherent to say, for example, that gender is quite independent of any biological factor, but that a person's physiology should be changed to match his or her claimed gender. I mean, that probably is quite difficult for people who might be confused about their gender and indeed their sexual orientation. But who complained?
Well, mostly members of staff.
Right.
Who expressed concern on behalf of people who might have been upset, which is what we so often see with these email campaigns. I'm not upset, but someone else might be.
Yeah. There
was one pupil who said, and it's an anonymous email, I think it's a she, who said that she was upset and her beliefs were challenged. And she's entitled to those beliefs, absolutely, of course she is, but she's not, I would suggest, entitled to say no one must challenge my beliefs.
I mean, do you think this is a result of, you know, transgender ideology sort of taking precedence over other ideologies? Is it also a result of an increased amount of secularism in society in general, that you think that Christian views are being forced out of school teachings?
I think it's a combination of both of those things. I think society has become more, on the face of it, secular. Traditional religion has declined, and in its place has rushed in all sorts of other ideas. And the trans and queer ideology, that's the bit that I have a problem with. I don't mind people being gay or lesbian, and they must make up their own minds about how to live
Just to
lives.
qualify on that, queer, you're using the word queer because that is now how some people who identify, it previously was used curiously as a slur for homosexuals.
Which is a very odd thing.
You're putting it in the new context of LGBTQ+.
It's the TQ+,
yes,
and
I understand.
queer theory, capital Q,
yes,
capital T.
Understood.
Yes.
Do you feel then that, I mean, the prevent referral is odd.
Yes.
I think it would strike anybody listening or watching this to be odd. Then this referral to DBS and for safeguarding could stop you from ever working with children again. I mean,
that's right.
Is your view that that's just over the top, it's vindictive, it doesn't really reflect the crime here?
It feels absolutely vindictive, because, as I say, I was reinstated on appeal with all these conditions, and then I was made redundant during COVID. And I feel that was just an excuse to get rid of someone who was too religious. Be that as it may, I was employed by the school for 18 months after the sermon, and I was fine to work with children. When the Employment Tribunal judgment came out, which we lost, and that's under appeal, and everybody was surprised, I think, at the result, then the head teacher decided to refer me to the Teaching Regulation Agency Disclosure and Barring Service to try and get me banned from ever teaching, ever working with children, which would include in a church.
What effect would that have on you, Rev? I mean, do you consider yourself a risk to children? That's the suggestion here.
Well, absolutely not. And,
no.
and it's worth saying that, I've got documentary evidence of people saying there is no suggestion that Reverend Randall has ever acted inappropriately towards anyone. So that is admitted. It's all about the sermon. It's all about the beliefs.
Looking back at the sermon now, and when you reread it, would you still deliver that sermon again? With the benefit of hindsight, would you have toned it down a bit? Do you stand by it 100%?
Well, I stand by the ideas 100%. Would I rephrase a few bits? Possibly I would, but I'm not sure I would particularly tone it down. But there are a few phrases I might go, oh, yeah, I could have said that a little bit better. That's always going to be the case. But the core ideas, children deserve to be encouraged to think. That is what education is supposed to be for. And I don't want to dumb down and treat them as if they're incapable of thinking for themselves, because I treat them as human beings, and human beings can think. They're not babies, and they're not unable to...
Although there could be an argument, was it too much of an adult sermon for a child audience?
I don't think so. I mean, people can read it for themselves and make up their own mind. But I think that part of what educators should do is challenge and raise the bar and say, come up and meet me at this interesting place. And some children will be straight on it and others will take time. But my sermons were always at that sort of, I'm going to challenge you a bit sort of level. And I didn't have people complaining about that until this sermon. So I think it's the topic of the sermon, not the style, that's really the issue.
Reverend Randall, thank you very much for sharing your story this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I do need to read out a comment in response by Trent College. It's previously responded to the dispute with Reverend Dr. Randall by stating that it is, and I quote, an inclusive community where we are proud of our commitment to support the well-being of everyone. We want every single pupil to be safe and feel understood here. The school is defending the claims.